Welcome to Truckee Talks. On today's show, we're going to be talking about local law enforcement and giving you an update. It's nice to have you on the show. Ken Duncan, welcome.
Thank you.
Ken, you are the captain with the Nevada County Sheriff's Office and also Truckee's contracted chief of police.
That's correct.
Okay, tell us a little bit, if you will, about the contract between the town of Truckee and Nevada County Sheriff's Office.
Well, Truckee has a contract for law enforcement services that is not unlike contracts with cities all over the state of California. Many large sheriff's departments, Sacramento, Los Angeles County, many others have contracts with smaller cities for law enforcement services. Ours is very similar to that. Primarily what it does is, over and above what you had before the town was incorporated, is the Sheriff's Office now provides for the town of Truckee traffic services, including traffic accident investigation, traffic enforcement, which formerly was handled by the California Highway Patrol. And now we do it on a contractual basis, so that there's a pay schedule established between the town and the county, and certain levels of service that are expected to be performed. That does not include the function of the jail. That's a county function, doesn't have anything to do with the town. So this law enforcement contract took effect in July and is supposed to run for 5 years.
Okay.
And we expect that it will.
Okay. Now you mentioned a key word there, and that word is jail. Recently we modified or closed down some of the jail facilities here in Truckee. Would you talk a little bit about that, what led up to that, and what we're doing now?
Well, it's a complicated process, most of which would be much too boring to get into in this format, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible. There is a minimum level of service that is required to be maintained by certain legal requirements and certainly expectations that are put upon all jail facilities by the California Board of Corrections. And we are inspected periodically by the Board of Corrections, and they have certain requirements that they put on us relative to the number of personnel we have to have on duty at any particular time. And there always has to be female personnel available when there's a female inmate. And we've run into situations recently where we have not had the ability to maintain those levels of staffing. We've had positions that have gone unfilled, and so we have either had situations where we had no females available to work in the jail, or we simply did not have staff available to be specifically designated for the jail. And so to keep up with the requirements that are placed upon us by the law and by the Board of Corrections, we have chosen, rather than to violate those laws and or requirements, to just shut the jail down when we can't staff it adequately, and that's where we are now. So what happens is, when we don't have adequate staffing available, all prisoners that we might take into custody have to be transported to the Wayne Brown Correctional Facility in Nevada City.
Now, how many officers does that take off the street when you have to escort somebody down there? Is that 2 officers or 1, or?
We follow long-established law enforcement procedures relative to prisoner transportation, whether the prisoner is a male or a female. So prisoners can be transported by a single officer. There are certain procedures that are followed if it's a male officer and a female prisoner, for instance, that ensure that things are being done as they should be. We did a study just recently to determine if this was having a negative effect on the level of services performed in the town of Truckee. And what we determined was it's actually not had a negative effect at all, but has had a positive effect. And some of the reasons for that are, we're paying officers on overtime to come in and be prisoner transportation personnel when the jail is closed, so that doesn't cost the citizens in the town of Truckee lost services due to an officer being gone when he would be on the street, because it's being done on an overtime basis. There are times, however, when we do have to take a person off the street and run them down the hill, and we try as best we can to have somebody from Nevada City meet us halfway so we don't have to make the run all the way down. But anyway, you look at it, it's going to take an hour out of service time. We try to fill that as best we can with reserve officers or overtime officers so that the impact is minimal. And it has, in fact, been minimal so far. We expect that this condition is going to continue probably until around the 1st of June before we're up to full staffing in the jail. And at that point in time, we should be back to business as normal.
So you do see this as a temporary situation?
Right, temporary
then?
situation.
Okay. Well, how does that impact subjects that you have to take to Nevada City? How do they get back up to Truckee? They're kind of on their own for that.
Unfortunately, we don't drive them back.
You're right.
So if I was told, for instance, last night we arrested a person who lives just a short distance from our office and was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol and ended up being transported to Nevada City. When that person is released, he's released in Nevada City, is going to have to find his way back.
He'll be sober by then.
Hopefully. Some way he's going to have to find his way back on his own. And that's unfortunate, and it is an inconvenience to the citizen, but that's the way the ball bounces in this circumstance, and we're not going to provide rides back to Truckee. So.
You've got to draw the line somewhere, and that might be the appropriate place to do it. Okay, so we're okay on staffing, and you anticipate that this will be back up, or at least you'll be staffed enough to have the jail facility operational in June.
Well, yeah, we're currently in the hiring process for correctional officer. We did a correctional officer test in January that is exclusive to the Truckee area. It was what we call a Truckee-only list. Now, people from anywhere could apply for that, but it's with the understanding that the opening is in Truckee, not in Nevada City.
Okay.
And we had a substantial number of people who went through that testing process, and there's a good number of people on the list, certainly enough to fill all the vacant positions. We currently have 4 vacant positions, and we're hoping to fill all of those relatively soon. By the time you get through the testing process with written tests and oral boards and background investigations and psychological examinations and physical examinations, it's a process that takes several months. And so we're hoping that we can have everybody through that process, people on board, in training, on site, not later than the first part of June.
You'll have to let me know if I'm stepping into territory that you can't go into, but there's been some concern that the sheriff's employee that was working in the jail facility that's been taken out of that responsibility, were there appropriate background checks done on that person? Are the background checks really sufficient now to ensure that things like that don't happen again?
Well, there is an absolute mandate in effect that I can't discuss that situation. Right. All those questions have to be answered through Sheriff Arbaugh. Okay. I'm sorry about that, but that's the way it is.
I understand.
But I can tell you that it is routine practice and policy in every employee that is hired now and has been hired in the past. We conduct an extensive background investigation, which includes a criminal history check that would encompass all areas of this country. We check with former employers, and that was done in all cases and has been done for at least 15 years. All employees go through those background processes. And so that's continuing to this day. Those people that we're hiring today that are in process now are going through that same background process, and it's been in place for some time.
Okay, well that's good to know. Are any of the positions that you're hiring for now trainee positions? Would they be people that have never worked in law enforcement before?
Sure, it is an entry-level position. A person might find themselves getting through the process faster if they had previous experience. So one of the persons, for instance, who's going through the process right now has worked a substantial number of years in the corrections field, and that person is probably going to find themselves through the process a little quicker than an entry-level candidate. But all persons, entry-level or experienced, are eligible to apply, and many have applied in both of those categories. And when they're hired, they have to go through a 12-week training program in the facility, plus a 3-week classroom, what we call jail academy. So it's a jail operations training academy that takes 3 weeks. And so anybody who comes in, whether they're previously experienced in corrections or whether they're new, will be at the same level of training within a relatively short period of time, in about 3 months.
Pretty steep ramp-up period.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty intensive. Well, we're going to be talking about in the second half of our show of your volunteer program and the trainee program. So we'll get into some detail about that on the second segment of the show. But as far as the concerns that people have about the town being staffed up, it sounds like we're pretty safe right now.
We're fully staffed as it relates to field deputies,
Okay.
Which is unusual, and we should be fully staffed as it relates to the jail within a relatively short period of time.
That's great to hear. That's good to hear. Just one quick question, and then we'll wrap up this segment. Are you making an extra effort to hire minorities or women in this, or is there a mandate to do that?
We would like for our jail staff to be at least 50% female. It would be preferable to us, actually, for all of the jail staff to be female. But that's probably not going to happen, but we would certainly like at least 50% of the staff to be female. And we are in desperate need in all positions in the Sheriff's Office in Truckee of people who are fluent in Spanish, and we would be bending over backwards to bring people on board who have that bilingual ability.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, too. That's a word to the folks. All right, we're speaking with Ken Duncan from the Nevada County Sheriff's Office. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to Truckee Talks. We're talking about local law enforcement, and with us here is Captain Ken Duncan from the Nevada County Sheriff's Office. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Ken, let's talk a little bit about that volunteer program, the Sheriff's Volunteer Program. How many volunteers do you have, first of all?
Well, in Truckee, we just completed a volunteer academy with 5 volunteers, and that supplements a program in Nevada City where we have approximately 10. Now, I tell you about both because some of the volunteers from Nevada City have come to Truckee to work events, and certainly over a period of time, some of the volunteers from Truckee will go to Nevada City to work events. So about 15 total, and they just do any number of things for us that are tremendously valuable.
What is their scope of authority?
Well, they have no peace officer powers. You will see them out and about. They will be wearing the same trousers that I'm wearing, the dark green trousers. The shirt will look the same, except it's going to be white. It'll have the same patches on the shoulder, and instead of a badge, it'll have a volunteer patch across the left breast, and volunteer patches on the shoulders also. And they will be used for any number of assignments, but none of those assignments are enforcement oriented.
Okay.
They are only there to assist us in various ways: crowd control, traffic control, clerical functions, maybe being out doing some eyes and ears only patrol, just as additional people to be out observing situations. They are not to be confrontational. They are not to get involved in situations, take enforcement action. They are only to observe and report and perform duties such as last summer, for instance, we had some of our volunteers up assisted with one of the events at Donner Lake. We had another situation. There was a concert up in Tahoe Donner, and some of our volunteers were there assisting with crowd control and traffic control. So that's primarily what they're there for.
Really relieves you of having to put
Right.
deputies or sheriffs out there. That sounds like a good program. Who would be a likely volunteer?
Well, anybody. We've had volunteers from, I think the youngest volunteer we've had was a 19-year-old. He obviously had law enforcement aspirations, was looking for a career in law enforcement, and relatively shortly after he became a volunteer, within a year, he was in the Highway Patrol Academy, so it worked for him. We have volunteers who are senior citizens, and we have volunteers who are young folks. We have in our group here, in our new group here in Truckee, we have 3 people who are probably late 20s to mid 30s, and then 2 folks who are senior citizens, and varied interests, varied backgrounds. They're going to be tremendously helpful to us.
That's great. What kind of hours can they expect to put in?
Well, we ask them to give us a minimum of 4 hours a week.
Oh, that's, yeah,
Now,
that's doable.
but they're volunteers, and I know full well. I ran the volunteer program in Nevada City, and I've been involved with this one since its inception, and I know full well that if I put too much pressure on them, they won't volunteer anymore, and I lose the resource. So if they tell me they want to work 4 hours every 2 weeks, I'm going to say, okay,
I'll
that's
take
fine.
it. I'll take it.
But a minimum of 4 hours a week, because that allows them to stay in touch with the operation, with the people. It allows the people in the organization to become familiar with them, and it will keep them in touch with the things that they have to do. We have a fella in Nevada City, for instance, who does nothing but work 4 hours a week distributing commissary in the jail. The inmates have the right to buy candy bars and magazines and stuff, and he assists with that. And that his volunteering 4 hours a week has freed up an entire position, a correctional officer position in the jail. So it's a very valuable program to the organization. And as you mentioned earlier, otherwise we would be using people on an overtime basis to fill these slots. And these folks have chosen to do this on a volunteer basis, and that's extremely valuable to the community as a whole.
That's great. Now, you've got a fairly extensive training program, and we've got a film clip that we'd like to roll and kind of just have you walk us through that and take a look at what some of the activities are for your trainees. And we've got a gal here trying on her sheriff's jacket.
Yeah, this is Beverly Gorst, and she's trying on. All of these folks are going to have uniforms, and that jacket's furnished by the department, and they went through a process of being fitted. This is training that all of the volunteers take in first aid and CPR.
Okay.
They're all first responder qualified. We train them at our expense.
That is a training dummy, by the way, audience.
Yes. And the fellow with the beard there is Officer Terry Oates. That's Bill Furnell, and
He's one of our producers.
Yes, he's involved in doing the necessary CPR stuff.
So you learn about adults and
Yeah,
babies.
They're looking at CPR with infants, and they also learn how to do a Heimlich maneuver on a baby. So it's all very valuable training. This they spent 8 hours one day doing a defensive driving class. Since they're going to be out there in sheriff's vehicles, we certainly want to make sure that they have had some training in driving. So they all enjoyed that very much. They had a lot of fun.
Have you included Bob Drake in any of that training?
Actually, Bob Drake is the coordinator for the volunteer
Good for
program.
him.
So he's
for him.
he's very much involved in it.
Well, I know I'll get some ribbing from bringing his name up, but I know he does a lot in that program as well. What is a day in the life of an officer up here like? What is a typical day like? I think people don't really have a grasp or don't fully understand what all the duties are involved in being a sheriff.
You know, that's an interesting question. One of the classes that I taught to the volunteers had to do with how extensive the duties are of a person who works law enforcement in this community. Probably, and I don't say this just because I'm the commander here, because I'm one of them, but because it's true. When you list all the duties of a law enforcement officer, you'll find that a deputy sheriff has more duties than any other category, more than a policeman, more than a highway patrolman, because we are also deputy coroners, deputy public administrators. We do all the things that a policeman does, traffic, arrests, investigations and such, working the jail, serving civil papers, a lot of things that no other law enforcement agency does. And then when you add to that all of the local police officer responsibilities, being a traffic accident investigator, being radar certified, being a person responsible for traffic enforcement, you have a police officer who has many more duties than anyone else that you'll find. If you were to compare our officers with a highway patrolman, for instance, he has many, many more duties and responsibilities than a highway patrolman does. Mm-hmm. If you were to compare him to a city police officer like in the city of Reno or the city of Grass Valley, you'll find that you add those additional duties of jail responsibility, in some circumstances and situations, the necessity to serve civil papers, the necessity to go out and conduct a coroner's investigation. A lot of people don't realize that we don't have a coroner's office in Nevada County. We are the coroner. Mm-hmm. We just don't do death reports where you fill in the blocks. When we do a coroner's case, we have to do a full-blown death investigation. All aspects of that death have to be investigated to a significant degree, which may or may not include attending a pathologist investigation to determine cause of death. Mm-hmm. Death notifications are routine in our situation. That can be very traumatic for an officer. Yes. When he has to go out and advise a young mother, for instance, that her child has just been killed in a traffic accident. There's a lot of duties involved that most people don't see. They see that officer as he's driving down the street, and they're probably curious as to what it is that he's doing. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, that officer is, especially if he's working a day shift, he is always involved in some activity. Mm-hmm. He is either going to a radio call, following up on a criminal investigation, coming back from a radio call, going to the office to write some extensive reports. So it's he's a busy guy, and then you throw in the weather. Mm-hmm. that we have here,
holiday
the necessity
weekends.
for traffic traffic direction, traffic control, crowd control, those kinds of situations. And these are very, very busy people.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. And the more I learned just from reading up for the show, the more I thought, well, how can these guys get their job done? It really does seem like a challenge.
It's a difficult task, and they're very busy constantly.
What do you work in cooperation with other law enforcement entities like Highway Patrol?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, we have a real good working relationship with all the law enforcement agencies in the area, Placer County Sheriff's Office, the Highway Patrol, State Parks, for instance, mm-hmm. Who also has jurisdiction in the same area that we work. They come into our office frequently. We go into their offices frequently. I maintain good relationships with the commanders of those agencies, Placer County, Washoe County, mm-hmm. the Highway Patrol. And we try to solve problems, as informally as we can, and keep each other advised of criminal situations that are occurring. For instance, last summer we had a real problem with auto burglaries, series of crimes. Mm-hmm. When by the time we've got all the agencies together around the Lake Tahoe Basin, we brought all of those cases to a successful conclusion. The suspect was arrested and so forth. And it's all because of that kind of cooperation. So it's really a vital part of our business. We cannot consider ourselves an island. We have to work together, and we do that as a matter of routine.
What about other kinds of outreach programs? Do you have any programs, for instance, in the high school?
Well, you may or may not be aware we have an officer who was assigned to do two things. One of his responsibilities is he's the DARE program mm-hmm. officer, the DARE presenter in the elementary schools. And he also is routinely working the secondary schools, that's the middle school and the high school here. Has very good working relationship with the administrators of the school. He's here frequently. Mm-hmm. He is the one who does follow-up investigations on crimes, takes initial reports of crimes at the school. And his relationship with his particular constituency has been very good. So that would be our primary area of outreach, other than we have some other specialized assignments, but they're mm-hmm. mostly enforcement oriented.
Okay. What are some of the challenges that might be facing your office in the upcoming year or so? I would think that yours is really a job of overcoming challenges on a minute-to-minute basis.
Yeah, there are some significant challenges. One of the biggest problems we have here is turnover for many reasons. We're trying to find a way to keep our seasoned veteran officers, mm-hmm. Keep them here, keep them from leaving. We have some very highly qualified officers who are leaving to go to other agencies for various reasons. Pay is not insignificant in that, and we're trying to find ways to keep them longer. It's a real loss to the community when you take a seasoned veteran officer who is very good at what he does, and that officer goes off to somebody else's agency, then you have to start over again with an entry-level person. You have to train that person. And it takes 3 to 5 years for a police officer to get to the point where they really know what they're doing.
Ken, you've got kind of an opportunity right now to talk to the viewers, the people of Truckee. Is there anything that you would want to say to them or ask of your local citizenry? Is there any message you'd like to impart to them?
Well, I'd like to say that from a personal perspective, I encourage communication, and I certainly would like to say to those out there that are members of the Hispanic community that I really encourage you to become part of the organization. Communicate with us. Let us know what your needs are. Consider becoming part of the organization. We really need people from the Hispanic community to be part of our organization as dispatchers, as correctional officers, as police officers, as clerks. We would encourage that. And certainly, I think the biggest thing is just communication. I would really encourage people to communicate with me. I'm not always available, but I'll always return phone calls.
You've got that pager on.
So call me if there's a problem, and I'll do everything I can to help resolve that problem. If there's you have a community meeting out there that you would like somebody from our office to come and talk to your group, call me, and it'll either be myself or someone else. We'll be happy to do that. We have crime prevention officers trained in things like Neighborhood Watch and other crime prevention programs. We encourage you to take advantage of that. Call us. We'll come out, do a presentation for your particular group, help you get started with a crime prevention program. Basically, though, overall, I think communication is the key. And we are your law enforcement agency, and you need to communicate with us about what you see as important.
Great. Ken, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You and your whole team do a real good job for our town, and I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us here on Truckee Talks. As usual, we'd appreciate your input or feedback, ideas for future shows. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.